Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat 5 segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. Hello. Welcome back to Big Fat 5. A podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum and a proud member of the Drum Click Podcast Network. You can find out more about both of these at bigfatsnaredrum.com and thedrumclick.com. All right, so first things first, I have to make a correction from last week. Mark Stepper was our guest, and by the way, I take just as much blame for this as he does because I thought the exact same thing, but a listener pointed out that we wrongfully attributed the drumming on Rag Mama Rag by the band to Levon Helm. It makes sense as he was a damn drummer, but it was actually a different member of the band, pianist, multi-instrumentalist, and singer Richard Manuel. Please reach out to me if I ever make a mistake. Email me at ben@bigfatsnaredrum.com. I'll definitely be pissed, but at least I'll be able to correct myself. All right, so this week's guest is Ian Chang. I love Ian's playing. In addition to being a monster solo act, Ian also plays with Son Lux and Landlady, both of which have released new music recently, among many other projects. His timing is extremely fluid, but still grooves and never loses the essential pocket that makes it work. And oh boy, does it work. I have so much respect for Ian's individualism behind the kit, and I was really excited to learn the top 5 influences that made him into the player he is today. So, please enjoy my conversation with Ian Chang. More than most drummers, I'm really curious about this. So how do you break down a 2-hour practice session?
So it's funny you ask that because I really haven't been playing the instrument much lately because, well, in the pandemic, like I live in Dallas and I have like downstairs neighbors and I live with my partner and stuff, and I don't have a space to really practice besides my little home studio, and it's pretty loud when I do in here. So, yeah, when I do get to carve out some time to practice, it's usually actually the opposite, I think, of what people might assume I would go for, which is just like rudiments and like, you know, like putting rudiments around the kit in different ways. Yeah, usually like kind of more technical things because that's the thing that slips the quickest, at least for me. So it's like I got to mow the lawn. And lately it's been untended, unfortunately. But so that's one thing that I do tend to practice. And we all have our weaknesses, and I know mine, and they're really specific, and I'm not going to divulge them on this podcast.
Damn it.
No, they're just like really little, like specific things, certain tempos, you know what I mean? And I'll just kind of work on those. Yeah, that's generally what I do lately, and I'll do like pad work and stuff too, just to kind of try to keep my hands in shape. Yeah, it's kind of a boring answer, but that's the
answer though, and that's what I think. Yeah, I mean, when you're playing, are you very cognizant of technique?
I'm not. When I'm playing, I'm definitely not thinking about technique. I do think about being relaxed, even though I'm not the most relaxed player. Maybe that's why I think about it, but yeah, I think while I'm playing, like especially on stage or in the studio or something, that's like not really on my mind. I think my like drum teacher in college, he was kind of like, okay, so your technique's like pretty good, but it's not amazing. but I think it's good enough, so we'll like deal with like other things, and so that's kind of like what I've like how like after that I've sort of dealt with it in a similar way, I guess. But I loved my teacher, Tony Moreno. He's an absolute badass, and for all the drummers listening who don't know who he is, he's like completely next level. So check him out. Yeah.
Tony Moreno.
Yeah, Moreno. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so with your beats and everything, the cool thing, and I've heard Son Lux be described this way, is that the beautiful thing about Son Lux is that you can't really describe it. And I would also say that's similar to your drumming style in the best possible way. But when you are creating a beat, do you have any non-negotiables that make it an Ian Chang beat, if that makes sense?
Not really. And I think, people, if anyone, like if a drummer like knows about me for some reason, it's usually for like some of the more off-kilter stuff I've done, especially with Son Lux, where I can really feel free to explore some weird options, and I know the guys in the band are like there for it, but in a lot of cases, I do tracking for all kinds of folks, and I'm like, I don't really have nothing's off the table. Like, I think it just depends on the musical situation. If I'm playing just like quarter notes on a floor tom, like that's like totally cool if that's the right thing, you know what I mean? So there's no real, I don't think there's really any non-negotiables. I do have like some like allergies to maybe like certain types of drum sounds, but in general, I'm pretty open, yeah.
What would those allergies be?
Just like super bright, pingy cymbals, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
And
I
maybe
was hoping you were
like,
going to say snare drum. And I'm like,
I was
well,
gonna say maybe like the 311 style, like kind of pingy snare. Although I have used that in some situations, so it just depends, man. Yeah.
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 Well, I did want to bring up a few comments from Instagram, because we asked people if they had any comments, and you might have read them. You were tagged, but Brody Simpson did not have a question, and he just said he wanted to make it public that he was very keen to listen to this one, and that he wanted you to know that you're sick.
That means a lot coming from him. I mean, I think the two of us are maybe wired in similar ways. He definitely explores a lot of similar concepts that I do, and I really look up to him for the sounds and tones that he gets in the studio, and kind of using the studio as an instrument in and of itself. Yeah. So thanks, Brody. That's tight.
Yeah, when I was doing last year's best of 2020, I was going through his episode, and I was like, basically his episode could just be one of the best ofs. It was hard to figure out a clip, because he's a very insightful man. So next one is Rob Mayer, which is at liquid_gravy26. He kind of has two questions, but I think the first one is the one I really want to focus on. And he wants to know how you view your role as a composer when using both the Sunhouse system and or software and acoustic drums.
So it depends on the context. I'll start with Landlady and Son Lux. I really lean more heavily on like the acoustic instrument in both those scenarios, and in Landlady, I guess Landlady is really pretty much just all about like capturing acoustic sounds and playing and layering stuff. In Son Lux, it's a little bit more of a mix, but I think the core of my role in that band is still kind of at the drum set. We do a lot more kind of heavy processing to what we record, and there's obviously electronics involved as well, but a lot of that is also not just like, if you hear an electronic beat in Son Lux, it's very likely that it could be Ryan, the singer, who is sort of like the original member who started out as a solo project, and then because he's got like programming chops for days, so depending on the song, it could be either one of us. When it comes to translating that stuff live with Son Lux, I use like a hybrid acoustic and electronic kit, so I have Sensory Percussion set up on my acoustic kick and snare, just so I can kind of have like the samples that we've made on the records being kind of triggered by the kicks and snares blended with the acoustic sound. And then I always have also one mesh head drum that's sort of like the wild card, and I can throw any sounds on there. Sometimes it's like textures, so I'll like roll on it and it might be like a flurry of saxophones. Sometimes it's like claps and whatnot, the normal stuff. And then I also have an SPDS because there's just a lot of samples that I'm handling with that band when we play live. And Landlady, it's a little bit more straightforward. I do have an SPDS for like little things, but it's mostly just like acoustic playing. And then in my solo project, the show that you saw, the hi-hat, I made a very conscious decision to like make it like completely non-acoustic, because I think it was, I think people always talk about electronic music as being something that's got no limits, and it can almost be dizzying, like to like consider like how you even like make creative decisions. And one thing I really wanted to explore, and in particular at around the time that you saw me playing, I wanted to explore like playing like a completely electronic environment that was like completely off click, and also pretty improvisational, because I think that's like something that, as unlimited as electronic music is, 99% of the time you hear something, it's going to be on some grid, you know what I mean? And so hearing those environments played by a human in a way that's like pushing and pulling feels kind of uncomfortable, to be honest, but is something that's interesting that I was kind of exploring. And and I also just found it very liberating to completely divorce myself from the acoustic kit, because then I'm not negotiating like, oh, like when I hit the snare, like what sample's happening with that. It just like gave me complete like blank canvas for whatever. Like I think there's like one song that I play that's like almost mostly just organ samples, and that's like super cool and fun for me to be able to use the physicality of my drumming to translate something in like a totally non-drum kind of atmosphere. Yeah.
Well, you're a great seguer, because I do want to play a song from your first solo EP from the album Spiritual Leader, or the EP Spiritual Leader. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to play the song Quarry, and
that's the one with organs.
That's kind of why I was like, oh, he chose this one. Yeah. Well, it's sick. So people listening, and correct me if I'm wrong, everything that you're hearing on this track that I'm going to play is you hitting your drums with a stick, and it sounds really rad. So just listen to this.
No overdubs too. That was like my other rule with that EP.
For people that don't know about Sunhouse or Sensory Percussion, can you explain a little bit about? They're like, what? That's drums? I don't get it.
Yeah. So Sensory Percussion is, at its core, it's a machine learning system, and what you can do with that is that you can teach the software to understand your drumming. That's like the most like basic way to put it. And the way that looks in practice is that. And this works for acoustic drums or mesh heads or anything that like gives enough acoustic information for the sensors, which are basically microphones, to analyze the sound. So you take a drum, and then you have 10 different zones that you can hit. There's like center of the head, edge of the head, shoulder to the rim, tip to the rim, rim shot to the center, rim shot to the edge, stick shot, and cross stick. I think that's all of them. I might be missing some. But you can basically program the software to recognize these different kinds of hits by, hitting learn and then hitting the center of the head about 70 times or so. And then it'll just know. But the thing that's really powerful about it isn't the fact that it can turn any drum into like a 10 pad sampler. And honestly, it's not very practical to use that way because accuracy and consistency is like really difficult to like get it exactly right. But the thing that's powerful about it is that say you train the center and the edge of the head. You train those two things and the software will understand gradients between the two. And that's what makes it really interesting because now when I move from the center to the edge, I can map that movement to any knob.
Oh, okay.
And
that's so sick.
Yeah, that way it becomes like something that's you can really use kind of one's expressiveness on a kit and all the subtleties and colors of what playing an acoustic kit is like, and like port it to, you know, an electronic environment that's like in a way that's very lively and very subtle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty much like how I would describe it, and it's got tons of features and all kinds of cool shit to make things fun. But yeah.
Well, it's just in this day and age, you see so many new products, and this is the one that really I think does change the game. It's a whole new perspective on how to play drums, and it's cool that your name, I think to most people that know Sunhouse or Sensory Percussion, your name is synonymous with the kind of progression of that technology. So you're gonna live in infamy, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm lucky because I got to beta test it, and the guy who developed it is a friend of mine, and so I was kind of lucky and in on the ground level, and it was really exciting to me, and it was actually kind of my window into making electronic music myself.
Yeah. All right, the second and last song I'll play from your past is actually from Landlady's new self-titled album, and it's the song Molly Pitcher, and I love the drums on this one.
Lightening loads, riding up the treble on God only knows where the cold air meets the heat for the storm. On our best behavior, tightening clothes, measuring the hours our sanity goes, where the cold ground breaks along carriage roads. I believe in liars,
That's a fun one. It's nice and kind of loose and free, and we recorded that one. And I think a lot of this record we recorded just in the studio, all of us playing together, off click, and yeah, that is a very good example of that because, I mean, that particular song, we made the conscious decision to not really have set parts because everyone in that band is really sensitive improviser, and so yeah, we kind of just played it a few times down, and that was that.
I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but one of the reasons I chose that song is because I believe in my head, I feel that your second choice of your Big Fat Five, that drummer might have had an influence on that kind of style drumming. I could be wrong.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, well, on that gem of a cliffhanger, let's actually jump into your top five.
Sweet.
As always, I send my guests prompts, and they can choose which ones they want to kind of dive into. And so the first one that you chose to respond to was a specific groove that completely changed the way you think about drums. And I'm really bad at pronouncing things I don't know. So is it Dam Funk or Dom Funk?
It's Dame Funk.
Dame, of course, the third option.
Not the obvious option, but yeah.
yeah. So Dame Funk on... Peanut Butter, which is Wolf's B-Ball Zombie War compilation.
Yep. Great compilation. There's a ton of awesome, like, inspirational beats on there, but this was one that I kind of really got obsessed with and was obsessed with being able to play it faithfully on the kit. So, yeah.
Yeah, let me play a little bit of it, then we can talk about it a little more. Yeah, that would be a tough one to execute because it's all about feel.
Yes, yeah. And it's, you know, you can break it down to a certain degree in terms of like, what grid is the hi-hat on and what grid are those like flutter kicks, like double kicks, like what grid do those belong to, and like how are they different. But at the end of the day, it's like it's just about like playing to it with headphones and trying to get into the particular swing that this track has. And yeah, I was in college at the time, and I just would play this on loop for like a while because I was so enamored with it.
Yeah, there are a lot of drummers that I've talked to that the Dilla feel, it gets brought up a lot because that's the good way to describe kind of the broken drunken drummer thing. And some of them have said they think of it in quintuplets. Some of them they think of it just purely by feel. I've always gone on the just by feel aspect of it. Is that generally what you do? Do you ever dissect things on a grid, or is it,
Definitely have done both approaches, and this is something I used to practice a lot when I was trying to kind of like find a certain type of fluidity with playing grooves that includes what we just heard, like this type of vocabulary. I would practice, micro displacements, which is a popular thing that people are talking about. I think Mark Giuliano is like a master of this, and just like practicing like being able to like displace things in a beat by like a 30-second note or like a 16th note triplet or something. So there's that, and then also the idea of like playing a groove that maybe has a part of this beat of it is in a triplet, and this beat of it is more of like a 16th note grid, and just like, and maybe this beat is a quintuplet, like mixed grid stuff. So those are two things that are like technical ways that I kind of went into trying to practice this stuff. Quintuplet is definitely a big one. As you mentioned, a lot of people talk about that. And then on the flip side, the other thing that I would practice was like playing to a click that clicked like once every 4 bars, and just like playing real free and not like, and trying to see and really feel like I'd literally play like basically out of time, but then try to like hit those marks like every 4 bars. Obviously not a very useful thing to practice, but it was just something that was kind of like, I was interested in feeling the bigger time and not thinking about grid, and then being able to sort of like snap into it if I wanted to, so that there was sort of like this, I don't know, like it's like you can like target practice like without like trying to snap into like the grid per se, but just like being able to be aware of the grid while like not playing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's just it's a buddy, but you don't have to call it every day.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was kind of a mix of few different approaches to try to like kind of loosen shit up.
Yeah. So you said that you were at college when you heard that for the first time?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of, is that totally different than the drumming you grew up playing? Or how would you describe yourself as a drummer before you kind of, that just tickled your fancy?
So I think all through high school, I was like, doing the thing, like learning different styles, like learning how to play like bossa nova and different like rock and jazz and all this stuff, and kind of like getting like the main idioms like under my fingers and to some degree. Definitely not mastering anything necessarily, but it was a pretty wide net. And I think late in high school I got into jazz, and that's what I went to school for, jazz like drumming. And then my freshman year in college, I was like looking for gigs because I was in New York for school, and I answered a Craigslist ad for like a weekly hip hop thing, like Sunday nights, and I did that for a few months, I think, and that's kind of like when I really started to get into like the minutia of like how to like play the feel of like hip hop backbeat playing, and then I got really obsessed with like Flying Lotus and people like that,
Sure.
And Dame Funk was definitely part of that, and yeah, so that's kind of how I would say I got into it. But before that, I was like super into singer-songwriter stuff, super into classic rock, jazz, and even like some other like electronic music as well. I've always kind of been a pretty omnivorous music listener, I think. Yeah.
All right, so Number 2 is kind of what I was alluding to before with Landlady, with that song. It's your favorite Phil choice moment or moment from a certain record. And you chose I Live With You, which is Grizzly Bear. And how do you pronounce this album name?
I think it's Vekatimist. I don't know.
That's what I was gonna say that. The one time I don't even try, I would have gotten it right. But all right, so yeah, let's just play. And you said the fill happens around 4 minutes and 8 seconds, so I'll start it a little bit before. That's
Raging.
So cool. Yeah. And the sonics of it, there's a whole lot more going on probably underneath than you really realize. Yeah, man.
Yeah. I remember hearing that fill for the first time. Again, I was in college. And yeah, I think that it's funny. I was just talking about like how I used to exercise, like playing with a click once every 4 bars. And like this song is one of the reasons why I was interested in being able to do that kind of thing. Because like that was the first time I'd ever, I think like going to college, you know, and studying jazz, I had a lot of like sort of my vocabularies and, you know, just different compartments for different drumming, you know, in my head. And I was interested in things that were different and I was always interested in finding new ways to merge them. And, you know, to say that what we just listened to is like a rock record with like, and that's a rock drum fill, like that was the first time I ever heard a rock drum fill that sounded like that. You know what I mean? That was
Sure.
Like basically completely discombobulated and like in a way that like felt more like an injection of free jazz, but then in a context where there's these heavy downbeats. So it's undeniable that you can like feel the pulse. And just like when you hear him like burst and it feels like he's like throwing a bunch of books like down the stairs and then like smashing on the downbeat, it's like so satisfying. And I just felt like it was such an emotional approach to drumming, and yeah, it really excited me. So yeah.
When you have a fill like that, do you try and learn it verbatim, or do you just take it in and go, okay, I love that for what it is. Now next time I want to do something like that, I'll channel that, but not actually learn it?
That's a great question, and I definitely do not. In this case, I definitely never learned this fill verbatim. Like I recognize that it's he's doing some things around the kit that are probably things that are comfortable parts of his vocabulary, but just like warping them in ways and then like and there's the downbeat, boom, you know what I mean? And so that approach is like kind of what I take away from it more so than necessarily exactly like how he did it, because I think in an example like this, it doesn't make sense necessarily to learn exactly what he played. But that might be helpful for some people, but for me, it's not like how I approached it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a question that a lot of people on Instagram want me to ask the guest, and it's how do you ingest your influences without ripping them off?
I think you got to do both things, and by both things I mean the thing that is like, you know, if you hear something that's really inspiring to you and maybe you don't understand it fully, but you want to understand it, then break it down and like, at the very least, like, you know, break it down to where you understand what's happening. And then the next level would be to like play it, you know. I think that's like super valuable because that's how you can grow and find inspiration in things that are outside of yourself to shock the system. And then the other direction is like, I think it's important to spend time experimenting by yourself at the kit as well, and finding, you know, just like look at the instrument from every angle and like just try to find something with your hands and play something that you've maybe never played before. Maybe like at the end of a practice session where you're doing more like technical things or learning songs or whatever, like just like have free time where you're like, okay, I'm gonna like just play and let my ears guide me, but also like try to push into uncomfortable territory and just try to find stuff, because you never know what might happen. I don't know. And that could look like, oh, like maybe trying to like prepare the drums in different ways to get different sounds, or it could be, trying to play a beat like differently. I don't know. It could look like anything. So I think it's important to like have that alone time, as well as to really do your homework and study the stuff that is exciting to you. Yeah.
Going back to the quarry thing, when you're working on, let's just say that song specifically, you had those organ sounds. Did you have an idea, or was it literally? I'm not sure how the interface or the software of Sensory Percussion works at all. But did you just kind of go, it's a rack tom, floor tom, rim, and then you just went, okay, I'm just going to start experimenting, and kind of did what you just said, kind of at the end of your practice?
That's totally what that was, because I started, and the whole EP, for the most part, except for maybe a couple songs, what came about in this way, where I found some sounds that were interesting to me. I processed them and messed with them in a certain types of ways, and mapped them to the kit in a specific way where they're affecting just created an environment. So I created like my drum kit of organs, and along the way I'm messing around, playing it a little bit and seeing like what feels good. And then when it feels like a kit that I can just like zone out and like play, then I'll just kind of mess around, try to find like themes and variations. And in that example is actually a good one for like finding something that my hands just don't normally do, because I think I started playing I'm so bad with like nomenclature of rudiments, but whatever right left is, it's a really common one. I started playing that on over the floor and the rack, and kind of like doing it in a pattern where like certain notes I was hitting on the edge of the head would pop out and create like sort of this vibe. And then I was put a kick, so it's like on this like 6/8 vibe, and then I found another melody that was more in 4/4 that was like really slow, and then I was like messing around with playing the kick in like this like 12/8 vibe with like this melody that was like very much in 4/4 over it, and that like broke my brain, and it took me a second to like kind of get, and then when I got it I was like, cool, like this is a fun thing, I don't know.
No, it's sick. I mean, when it comes to what you were doing, describing that with the whole Sensory Percussion, there's no way for you to sound like any other drummer in that setup. So you at least have that. You're like, I know whatever I'm doing is the first time anyone's been doing this.
I remember actually hearing Mark, I think maybe on your podcast, talking about how like, uniqueness is like sometimes can be a trap that people fall into, where they think they have to be unique. And I think maybe I do have a bit of that like fever or bug where like I'm always trying to do something different. But I do also think that like, sometimes it might look like me just like learning how to play something like really simple really well, and it can kind of go either way.
If you guys don't, I mean, Ian's referenced the Mark episode a few times, and it really is a good one. Mark's just like an old sage. Not that he's old, he's only a few years my senior, but he's a sage. He definitely put me in my place a lot during that show in the best possible way. But speaking of sages, let's go to number 2, a performance which you either played or witnessed that altered your musical course, and it's Deerhoof at Spiegel Tent. Spiegel Tent.
So it was a traveling venue called Spiegel Tent that like that like had a season in Brooklyn, and it's a really beautiful tent. If you look up photos of it, it's gorgeous and super unique. And Deerhoof is a band that I was already into at the time, and I believe they were touring off of their 2008 album Offend Maggie, but it was my first time seeing them live. And Greg Saunier, the drummer and sort of like the head of that band, just absolutely blew me away. Seeing like the intensity and intention that he put behind like every single note, while also still like being completely wild. It kind of rewired in my brain like what it means to be like a drummer on stage and to like really like mean everything that you're doing. You know what I mean? I think the same could be said of the first time I saw Brian Blade play, like 1,000%, you know, guys like that. It's just, you know, it doesn't even feel like they're playing drums. Sometimes it's like, it's just pure expression. Like that's the shit. And that's kind of how I felt when I saw that show. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of him, and have been lucky to be able to work with him in some capacities in the past few years. Yeah, so that's been really cool for me. And he's just like the most amazing, humble, like sweetest guy as well. Yeah.
Can you talk a little more about working with Greg?
Yeah. So well, the first example, the most recent example, I didn't work with him per se, but we both played drums on the same album. Is an album by Kazu Makino from Blonde Redhead. She put out a solo record like a couple years ago, and it's like about half and half, like me and him on the record, which was really cool for me. And the funny thing was that after that, I ended up touring that record, so I had to put my Greg hat on for like half the songs, you know what I mean? And that was such a joy. But the one time I really did get to work with him was I was drumming in a band called People Get Ready. This was a while ago, maybe like 2013 or something like that. I'm so bad at remembering when things happened, but that's just a guess. And he was producing this record, and I just remember it was just a really inspiring kind of process, and I got to kind of see just how like he's so good at making people excited about musical ideas, which is like what a producer should be, you know what I mean? And also like was so positive in the way he navigated everything, and always had really strong vision and really strong just like ideas. I don't know. It was really cool to work with someone like that at that stage in my life, and it definitely took a lot away from it. Yeah.
So you described his production style, but what do you mean by putting on Greg's hat as a player?
I mean, for better or for worse, like since he's such a big influence on me, it wasn't that big of a stretch to put on that hat, I think.
Yeah.
I would say he's like maybe 20% more like explosive in a way than I am. So in some ways it kind of pushed me to kind of really try to find like that fire and brashness, because he totally has that. And but yeah, I don't know. He's inspired. He's influenced me in a number of ways, both in playing and like, you know, he's the first person I ever saw like put two rides together as a hi-hat, or like, you know, just like all kinds of things. But yeah, so in terms of playing, yeah, I don't know. He has a certain kind of bounce that I'm just familiar with, and I tried to channel it as best I could, but still be myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you said you saw him in 2008, so I actually did pick a song from their 2007 or 8 record, because I'm assuming they were on tour promoting that. So maybe this will get the audience into the vibe of what Greg was doing. All right, so number 4 is a record that hit you at just the right time and represents a big piece of your artistry. So you chose James Blake's 2011 self-titled record, and you wanted to talk specifically about the song Unlock. So let's just play that right away, and then we'll get into it.
Treated walls care for me. Crossings gone on one of those feet. Treated walls care for me. When crossings call out, none are free.
That's so rad.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, what's the downbeat? Is it the kick? Is it the synth? Like,
Yeah.
is it like, does it like, I don't know, he created like this perfect like smoke screen almost where like the impressions of like what a normal beat are all there, you know, kick, clap, like it's a backbeat, but it like is not normal and it is warped in ways that like are really difficult to make heads or tails of it, but it feels really cool and like kind of like shifting sands. I don't know. I was really taken by this when it came out, and it is definitely like affected the way I thought about backbeat groove drumming and ways in which it could be explored that like feel familiar but strange at the same time. And I think that's something that I've definitely carried with me in terms of like types of grooves that I enjoy coming up with can be kind of like summed up in this way. There's like a thing that I like to do where I'll think of a very basic like normal kind of groove, backbeat groove, and then find a way to warp it where the impression of the original groove is still there because things happen in the same order and like the intention of like the way it's phrased is like still there, but it's like cracked, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's fully comes from me hearing this and like kind of being like, wow, like that's I can nod my head to that, but I couldn't even like necessarily tell you like where like the downbeat is hitting, you know?
Well, it's like if you gave an NPC to an alien and they're like, act human, and they only heard one song. But yeah, so going back to the Mark thing, that's how I approach a lot of things too, is how I have an idea and then how can I alter it a little bit. And his thing was sometimes that comes across superficial and disingenuous, but for you, I feel that is an extension of who you are, is it doesn't feel contrived when you're doing it, is what I'm saying.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. There's definitely instances where it probably was pretty contrived, but it's something that I keep banging my head against and trying. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of things that's why I asked what you work on in practice is, you know, is it rudiments? Is it playing along to songs and figuring out parts specifically, or is it messing with time and you know, saying David Letterman over like a 4/4 beat, you know? By the way, do you have a word, or like how do you count quintuplets? Is it innate to you now?
It's oh yeah, come on now.
Oh yeah, come on now?
Yeah. Oh yeah, come on now. Oh yeah, come on now.
That's going to be the promo for this episode, by the way. I'm sorry.
It's funny because it's actually not a great one. I think David Letterman's probably better because of the way the consonances are, but I just think, oh yeah, come on now, it's so funny. So.
Yeah. All right, so the last one, and you went rogue on this one and deviated from my prompts, which is encouraged. And so you wanted to talk about Bjork's vocal phrasing and how it changed the way you think about rhythm. So I'm going to pull up the song Undo from the album Vespertine, and yeah, we'll discuss. That's really cool, man. I'll be the first to admit I don't really know much of Bjork's catalog. That's a really cool song.
Yeah, man. Definitely envy you because then now if the inspiration strikes for you to check it out, the catalog is deep and amazing. There's so much awesome stuff, and yeah. Wow. Yeah, I actually haven't heard that song in a while, but it is a touchstone for me because I was, again, college, I was in college and like doing the thing that a lot of kids do in jazz school, which was like arranging a song, like a Bjork song or a Radiohead song or something for like a quartet,
Mm-hmm.
And it was like for my some recital or something. And I remember, I was kind of like figuring out like the harmony and like kind of figuring out like what I wanted the piano to play and what blah blah. And then it came time to like write down the melody, and I listened to it, and the melody is simple, but then I was starting to pay attention to exactly where she was placing her words, and it was like so weird and so strange and wrinkled in ways that are like so specific. Like she'll do the same thing like on like what is it like the way she sings A Struggle Up Here is like really really specific and really bizarre, and it's the same like each time.
Mm-hmm.
And the verses are like crazy, like, and a lot of people like give singers a bad rap about like not having good rhythm or whatever, but I think a good singer, they just think like the way rhythm works for them is just different. And I think what unlocked for me when I was transcribing her phrasing exactly was that, and this is an example where I like probably overanalyzed something where she was just like feeling it,
Yeah.
But what unlocked for me was just that like the relationship between melody and rhythm is way less separate than we're like made to believe, and that if I just played rhythmically like to a click and you heard like me just like hitting a ride exactly where she placed all her notes, like without like her voice and without the pitches or anything, there is something about just the phrasing alone that's like that communicates the emotion that she's putting into it. That might sound really weird, and some of your listeners might be like, "Fuck this guy," but it like really like blew my mind. It was some, and actually to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of like wrinkling regular beats. That's sort of like the goal for me too, is to do so in such a way that it feels emotionally expressive, or like where it's actually like kind of making something feel not just from a groove perspective like a certain way, but like from like a almost like a melodic lyrical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know, it's crazy, like listening to that song just now, it like almost brought me to tears, even just like hearing the way she phrased that shit is like so crazy. And yeah, that's something that like really rocked my world when I so I'm glad that I was forced to write down something for a saxophone player to play. And I remember when I handed it to my buddy who plays sax, he was just like, whoa, this is weird. Like,
yeah,
to like actually like kind of like get the phrasing, like it's not normal. It's not easy. It's not that it's not normal. It's just like it's way more complicated than it comes off, because when you hear it, it just sounds like she's singing. But
yeah,
the way where she's placing everything, it's like it's really deep, man. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, whether someone can resonate with that or not, that's what that melody did to you, and so it's an objective truth. That is what happened.
Yeah.
Well, Ian, I mean, that's your 5, man. I'm really stoked you were able to come on.
Absolutely.
And I know that I got some DMs of people that were really stoked, and I was actually just talking. I'm going to call him out, but Mike Dawson, I was chatting to him right before I got on with you, and he was super stoked to hear this episode.
Cool.
So
I've never met him, so much respect, and that's cool to hear that he was stoked about me being on here.
Yeah. Well, you should go on his podcast, the Drum Candy podcast. I'm sure he'd love to talk snare drums or anything with you. So
totally. Yeah. Speaking of snare drums, Big Fat Snare Drum, huge fan. Just needed to put that out there. It's super important for me to have in any studio situation or any touring situation, because it's a wonderful shortcut to getting some sounds that I like. So yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I mean, we try not to push it. I jokingly push it sometimes on this podcast, but it's nice. I did not pay Ian too much to say that. It was like $80. So don't.
No, he didn't pay me anything. And it's truly a product that I really enjoy and rely on in a lot of scenarios. So it's cool.
Oh, well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
So besides the Landlady having an album that came out this last or this year, are there any other projects that you'd want to hit people to?
Yeah, Son Lux put out like a 3-volume album over the course of last year and this year called Tomorrows. There's a lot of drumming, like stuff that I feel like drummers could potentially sink their teeth into, so definitely check that out. And I also have a solo record that I put out last year called Belonging. That was like the follow-up to the EP that we heard Corey from today. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm working on a lot of stuff now, but that'll be for the future. Yeah.
Ian, thanks for being on the show, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure.
And that's the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, which means the show will get better and bigger, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'd be an OG listener that could brag to all your friends. Anyways, also, why don't you go ahead and check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the socials. Just search for @BigFatSnareDrum and you will find it. This show is edited in part using iZotope RX8 audio editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at iZotope.com. Bye.